Hey everyone, in this video I'm going to be talking about obesity in Malaysia. This is part of my series where I go around the world and I talk about the conflict between nutrition, industry, government, health, and the consumers. I mean, it's kind of the same story wherever you go. As nations develop, they get more access to resources, more access to money, and they start spending more money on snacks and convenient food and restaurants. People value their time more and they don't want to spend all their days cooking, especially women. So they start to rely on convenience. And the same thing is happening in Malaysia, which has seen a huge increase in obesity over the last 30 years and is now the fattest nation in Asia. So let's take a look at what's going on here. This article centers around a guy named Dr. Singh Hong. I'm not sure. And most of the story occurs in Kota Baru, Malaysia. I've never been to Malaysia myself, so I'm not terribly familiar with the geography. I apologize. And Dr. Siong is the leader of a lot of these research papers that come out of Malaysia. He's the head of Nutrition Society of Malaysia. The problem is he's getting a lot of his financing from Nestle, which is the Swiss food maker and the largest food company in the world. Whenever you look at scientific research, you want to look at who's financing it because that can lead to biases. However, you can't immediately discount a research article because it comes from because of who finances it. That's not thinking critically. What really matters more is the methodology or the way they set up the study. If the methodology is good, then you can have faith in the results. I mean, that's kind of oversimplifying it, but I'm saying that methodology matters more than who finances it. Usually what happens is these companies finance a bunch of articles and then they dismiss the articles that don't produce results that they want, but they publish the articles that do produce the results that they want. So there is some bias, but that's true with or without financing from these large food companies, because what happens is you get researchers who have an ideological bias and they want to see certain results, and if they don't get it, they just don't publish the article. And if they do get the results they want, then they submit the article for review. So that's a huge problem in the research in research, all research actually, even in my field. Like I said, this is a huge conflict between the producers of the food, the consumers, academics, researchers, physicians, and policymakers. So it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out in various areas in various parts of the world. My last video was on Colombia. If you haven't watched that yet, you should probably watch that one. That one was about soda taxes. And the drive to impose a 20% tax on soda. I should do the one on Philadelphia. That one was an interesting one too. I've argued that the best way to deal with these problems is to muddle through. We just have to see where it goes. A lot of times intervention isn't the best thing because you end up hurting the people that you intend to help. That happens more often than not. The sale of processed foods in Malaysia are soaring. Sales have increased 105% over the last 5 years. There was a statistic here on the rise of obesity in Malaysia. I forget. Dr. T's work has been funded by Nestle, Kellogg's, PepsiCo, and Tate & Lyle, one of the world's biggest makers of high fructose corn syrup. He said scientists need cooperation and financial support. That's another factor to consider here, is that without the support of these companies, a lot of this research wouldn't be done. Now, a lot of these articles or these studies produce really dubious results, like the kids who eat a certain beverage or a certain breakfast cereal are healthier than the ones who don't. Take it with a grain of salt. But you can say that about most nutrition research. Nutrition research is notoriously flawed. It's very hard to do. It's very hard to do studies. It's hard to do controlled studies because you're not really tracking what people are eating. People are telling you they're eating something and they're really not, or the opposite. People have, I forget what the halo effect. They think they're doing really well and they're not. We don't have the technology and the tools to really track what people are eating. And I've pointed this out in a previous video, the limitations of nutrition science. We just don't have the technology to track it without these food logs. We're still kind of in the stone ages of research. And this is just one more problem. I mean, where are you getting your funding? I tend to take nutrition research with a grain of salt. I take seriously the studies that find that there's no difference, because I suspect that's what's really the case. When you look at different diets like high fat, low fat, is there a difference? I like the ones that say there's no difference. Usually, when you have really good methodology and a large sample size, that's usually the effect that you have. My point is, a lot of these limitations are not really discussed in this article. It makes it sound like the food manufacturers are the reason why so much of this research is bogus. It's one more problem, but I've pointed out many other problems with this kind of research. So here's a photo here of a typical grocery store in Malaysia. This stuff looks really interesting, and I actually want to try some of it. I guess that's a soccer jersey there, but it goes to show you this is what happens when you have economic development. In previous times, people went to the local market, they bought their vegetables, they bought their meat. I remember when I lived in Mexico for a while, there was this market next to the apartment where I was living, and you could get super cheap produce. I could look under my sofa and find enough change to buy a whole bag of produce. It was really awesome. But as countries develop, you start to see this. You start to see more convenience, a lot more selection, a lot more just abundance. And I think that's a really easy explanation for why people are getting fat. You can just open the top of this and start drinking it. I mean, you can drink your sugar now. And decades past, it wasn't like that. You had to prepare everything. But as societies advance, people value convenience more. That's what happened in this country, United States, back in the 1940s, 1950s, after World War II. Mothers didn't want to spend all day cooking for the men in the fields. They wanted something that you could they wanted products that helped them in the kitchen. Now we know that comes with serious consequences, and when we trade nutrition for convenience, sometimes the long-term effects aren't that good. We see soaring rates of chronic diseases and obesity and declining health. But then as people get really rich, 70,000, 80,000, they start to take more, they start to take better care of themselves, and they invest in their health more. Dr. T says we need to stop blaming the multinationals. I kind of agree with that. I think it's really easy to blame the multinationals like Pepsi and Kellogg's, and say, oh, they're making us fat, and fast food is making us fat. I think that's kind of a cheap answer. They're just delivering what we want. And the thing about marketing is that you can't sell something that people don't want. You can have the best advertising in the world. A lot of these companies spend billions of dollars every year testing new products, and most of them fail because people don't buy them. So this idea that you can just control people and make them buy something they don't want is kind of a myth, and it shows a lack of understanding of any true marketing. Here's some picture of some woman doing some exercises. I don't know what they're holding here. I guess they couldn't find dumbbells, so they found some sandbags. And I think Malaysia is a predominantly Muslim country, or maybe I'm thinking of Indonesia. Maybe I'm wrong. It doesn't really matter. But this is my point. As countries advance, people have more leisure time, which allows them to spend more time in the gym, and they take a greater interest in their own health. So 20 years ago, 30 years ago, women like this would not have been lifting dumbbells. My grandma was born back in the 1920s, for example. She's still alive today. God bless her. And she just never does exercise, because back in the 20s, women didn't sweat. Women weren't supposed to do exercise. I mean, imagine if it were 1933 and you put on some shoes and went running outside. People would think you're insane. They'd put you in an asylum. And then in the 60s and 70s, it became cool to run outside because we had reached a different curve in our economic development. Now you have, $2,000 Peloton bikes and people going to Equinox Gym. And usually when you look at people in the upper echelons of society, you see lower rates of obesity because they take better care of themselves. And the reason why is because they have more time and more money to do that. The Nutrition Society has promoted Nestle Healthy Kids, a program that promotes the value of breakfast and exercise. It has reached 4,200 children in 77 schools. Nestle says the program itself does not include product brands. But they're kind of selling Nestle here. And then this is a picture of a food court in the morning. I like what one girl says. She says, I eat cereal with milk for breakfast because it gives me energy and I don't feel sleepy in class. Now, this is a girl who's very in tune with her hunger, I think. I think she's an empowered eater in a way, because she eats something that gives her energy so she can do the things that she wants to do. That, in the end of the day, is why we should eat, always and forever. Maybe not always, but most of the time. You eat for energy so that you can live the life that you want to live, right? That is kind of the fundamental reason why we eat. We shouldn't eat because someone is telling us to, or because it's time to, or because we feel like it, or because somebody's shoveling food onto our plate. We should eat because it gives us energy. And without calories, nothing really happens. I wanted to show you this photo here. This is a photo of a traditional meal. Let's see, dish made with white rice, curry. I'm not sure what curry is. I guess that's like sauce or something. Fried chicken, eggs, and vegetables. What do I keep saying? What is an ideal diet? If you haven't watched that video, you should go back and watch it. It's grains, a animal protein, and then some vegetables. I guess those are the vegetables there, and eggs. That's what people naturally gravitate towards. A principal starch like the rice, the animal protein, and then the vegetables for micronutrients. That to me is a complete meal. It doesn't matter where you go, whether it's Brazil, Ghana, Malaysia, Japan, United States, or Canada. That is your standard meal. Here in the United States, you might get like a 6-ounce steak, some broccoli, and some wild rice. That to me is complete. People like to choose starch, protein, and vegetables. That seems to work worldwide. It's just an observation. I don't think we need to have a randomized control study to show that. This is a picture of a Malaysian woman, what's her name? Eliza, I guess. Before she attended this class, she did, Obesity Awareness class, she did not know that Milo, Nestle's breakfast drink, contains so much sugar. I had no idea. So what do I keep saying on this channel? Awareness is everything. You got to be aware of what you're doing and why. So she was drinking this Nestle drink, which had a ton of sugar, as most Nestle products have. And so she started to make better choices, so here she is making a salad. But the first step started with awareness. She had to be aware of what she was doing. She had to be aware of the nutrition label. She had to understand basic nutrition. I find that a lot of obese people don't know a lot about nutrition. Especially a lot of poor people, they don't seem to be that interested in nutrition and health. They just kind of eat what's available. But who am I to make fun of? At one point in my life, I didn't really care either, and I wasn't paying attention. I just kind of ate what was available and what was fed to me. So give everybody time. Some nutritionists say Malaysia's dietary guidelines are not as tough on sugar as they might otherwise be. They say to load up on grains and cereals and to limit fat to 20 to 30%. I don't think there's anything wrong telling people to limit fat to 20 or 30%, but if you're telling them to load up on grains and cereals without really specifying which grains and cereals, that could be a problem. I think if you told them that like oats, barley, teff, buckwheat, potatoes, brown rice, if you told them to eat those, I don't think it would be a problem. But when you tell people grains and cereals and then they go off and eat corn pops, that could be a problem, because then they're just loading up on the sugar. But I don't buy into this idea that a high-fat diet is necessarily better. I've explained why in previous videos. But I think if you have grains and cereals and fruits at the base, and then some animal protein, then throw in some fruits and vegetables, you're going to be just fine. My prediction is that in 20 or 30 years, we'll look back and say, oh, remember how everybody thought sugar was the problem? Right now, we're in that anti-sugar phase. Everybody thinks sugar is the problem. I think it's not really the sugar. It's just the excess calories that it encourages people to eat. What happens is people, manufacturers add sugar to everything to make it tastier, and that compels us to eat more. Now, is it the sugar itself, or is it excess calories? I suspect it's the excess calories that are making people fat. That's just my hypothesis. They quote David Ludwig, who I don't necessarily believe all the time. He's another one of these high-fat proponents. He's a Harvard nutrition expert. I find that a lot of these nutrition experts, especially from Ivy League schools, they're kind of in their own little world, kind of divorced from reality. They're the kind of people that like to plan everything. They're kind of like the central planners of society. They like to tell people what to eat. They're kind of arrogant in a way. I'm not saying that this isn't a war on expertise. I think there is room for expertise. But I do have a problem with people like David Ludwig, who never miss an opportunity to tell people what to eat, and then go on to advocate for laws that restrict access to certain foods. Usually the foods that they prefer people not to eat. Really, I think the best way to improve health is to let consumers choose, let them take on the consequences, and let them learn more about nutrition. As people progress on the economic curve, they are going to learn more about nutrition, and they're going to take a greater interest in it. Alright, I hope you enjoyed this article. This one was a little shorter than the previous one on Colombia. I hope you found it entertaining and educational. Don't forget to check out some of my other videos where I go around the world and look at the conflict between economic development, health, nutrition, government, consumers, and food manufacturers. Hope you enjoyed this. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button, and I will see you on the next video.